Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have 2 young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It. On today's show, we're thrilled to have Sarah Mukherjee MBE, the CEO of IEMA, join us for a very insightful conversation. Sarah, for those who don't know, has an incredible background, defying the odds to get to Oxford University, starting her corporate career within journalism and broadcasting within the BBC, and moving into leadership roles within Water UK, CropLife UK, before becoming the Chief Executive Officer of IEMA. In the episode, we dive into Sarah's background, her career journey, the role that IEMA plays within the sustainability ecosystem, and the future of the organisation. But we also hear her individual perspectives around leadership, policy, innovation, and sustainable transformation, and how we can inspire and support the next wave of sustainability leaders with a key focus on diversity and inclusion. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, the discussion, and let's dive right in. So Sarah, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Josh. And thanks so much for having me. It's a real privilege and an honour to have the conversation with you.
Excellent. Well, and it's a privilege for me as well, I suppose, on a very important day in the UK today to timestamp this. I'm not sure exactly when the episode will go out, but for those listening, today is the general election day, so I'm sure we'll have some questions about government and Parliament for you today. But for carving time out today, and I'm sure you've also got the time to go and make your vote. I've got mine just after lunch, so yeah, I'll be looking forward to doing that.
Yes, isn't it? It's funny how very, very rare times where people actually, that becomes a point of conversation. I was at a dinner last night and people were saying, yes, I've got to get in early. I'm going to do my run past the polling station. And yes, it is one of those moments where everyone comes together and all the morning news programmes don't sound like they have for the previous 6 weeks, because there is no politics by law, no politics or political debate. And we always used to find when I was still working at the BBC that actually in some cases listening and viewing figures went up, or you get loads and loads and loads of letters from people saying, gosh, wasn't that a great programme? I really enjoyed that programme. We have some more programmes like that without any politics in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, everybody's bored of it by this point. But look, we're definitely going to get into it. And thank you so much for being here. I suppose for the audience who perhaps do know you or know something about you, it'd be great if you could just give an introduction of who you are, I suppose an overview of IEMA and your role and remit, and then we'll go back and we'll tell the whole story.
Fantastic. So my name is Sarah Mukherjee. I'm Chief Executive of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, which is known as IEMA. So we are the global professional institute. We've got more than 22,000 members in more than 120 countries. So global institute for anyone who has an interest professionally in sustainability or the environment. And we would say that's everyone. And we'll probably get into that a little bit later. So as CEO, as you can imagine, my role is running the organisation, managing the staff team, doing all the stuff like well-being, career development, but also an external facing role as well. So if you like, I'm one of our brand ambassadors. I do a lot of speaking, try to help mentor and thought leadership, particularly as one of the few people of colour in running an organisation in this space. I have devoted quite a lot of time to trying to make the sustainability sector, which is not very diverse, more diverse and more reflective of modern Britain as well.
Well, excellent. And GS2 are very much a supporter of that as part of the diverse sustainability initiative that IEMA founded, and we work closely with Caris on that. So we can perhaps talk a little bit about that today as well. So you said over 20,000 members globally. How many staff do IEMA have that look after that huge number of individuals and professionals?
We have 45 members of the staff team, and some support, external support as well. So we have our finance function. We have Carol, our amazing finance controller, and she works closely with an set of accountants we use. And then we have our HR function is outside the organisation. I thought, and different organisations do this in a different way. We thought it was quite important to have an HR function that was external, so it didn't feel that it was part of the management decision making. And in fact, our senior account manager, if you like, or the person who works with us more closely, is very challenging with us sometimes, and will be quite clear that they think this decision needs to change or isn't the right one. And I think that external kind of challenge is really, really important, particularly when you're trying, as we are delighted to say, we are still one of the top small businesses for well-being in the country, as per Great Place to Work. I think if you're trying to build a well-being culture, that's really important that you have challenge, and you're not part of that senior management team decision-making process.
Sure, understood. Well, keen to talk a bit later about IEMA and the current situation there. But I suppose to go back, because you mentioned there being a CEO, a person of colour within the sustainability world as well, but also from humble upbringings. And I recently listened to another podcast that you did where you described that challenging upbringing that you had, and how you overcame those odds to study at Oxford. I was really keen today to, I suppose, understand more about that. How did you make that a reality? What was your childhood and upbringing like? And I suppose, lastly, that step change to make such a profound impact on your career journey from the ability to study at Oxford. So could you just paint the picture of what that was like and how that came to be?
Of course, yes. And that's a great question, Josh. Thank you. So I've been reflecting, because we had a chat before this podcast, and you raised this as an issue you wanted to talk about. So I have been reflecting on it. I think I was really lucky that I had a series of people who believed in me and gave me confidence throughout my young childhood and through up to Oxford. And I'm very aware that people from similar backgrounds to me often don't have people to give you that confidence, sometimes for very good reasons, because you're the first in your family who's looking to go to university or do tertiary education. So I had a hugely dysfunctional background. Single parenthood, everything was very chaotic. My life felt very chaotic when I was younger, and I think those of us who've been in that situation, you know that it's a constant tension. Even as a child, there is a certain amount of your mental bandwidth that's being taken up by, can we pay the bills? There's always a tension about paying the bills, or which bill you're going to pay, or where you're going to be living. Or we lived in Harlow in Essex in the late 70s, early 80s. It was the home of the British movement. It was not a nice place to be sometimes if you were of mixed heritage, or if you were of Asian heritage. So all those things. But my grandmother was one of those central points, and she had faith and confidence in me. She used to help me read. She used to take me to museums, all those sort of things. Then I had teachers along the way. And the teacher who said I should apply to Oxford, he might as well have said, well, why don't you apply to the moon? I just thought, what? Oxford? Are you kidding me? I went on
how much of an understanding did you have of how abnormal that would be for your situation when it was suggested?
I didn't have a Scooby. I mean, about anything. They were words I'd heard of them, and I think and this is why I think access and these kind of open access programs are so important. So I went on one for kids from really disadvantaged background to Cambridge, actually, funnily enough, because it was closer to me. I lived obviously in Hull. That Cambridge was nearer, and so I could do that in a day, and because we couldn't afford to stay overnight or anything. And I thought, oh God, this is really good, actually, isn't it? Yeah, there's full of these people who are really interesting to talk to, and this sounds like a really interesting course. And then I had a teacher who said, well, yeah, we think you should try the Oxford entrance exam. And I went, okay. I just had no concept of what it was like until I actually got there. And I spent 2 terms really unhappy. I very nearly left because it was just like everybody was speaking a different language. All these people who went home for the weekend to these amazing country places and or even comfortable middle class people were just not people I'd really had that much to do with at all. I had a couple of friends at school that had stable families and that sort of thing, but that culture shock was immense. And again, I think that Oxford, Cambridge and Russell Group universities are much better now at preparing and supporting people from disadvantaged backgrounds. But yeah, it was a massive shock.
Sure. But in making that leap, I suppose to the second part of my question, the impact that undoubtedly has had on your career to allow you to have the success that you've had, were you aware of that at the time, or did you feel the shift perhaps in opportunity by your peer groups and the types of conversations you were having and the people you were being introduced to? Like, was that something you were cognizant of back then?
Completely. Not to begin with, but as I went through, eventually, like with everywhere, you find friends who are from a similar background to you. And I think there was a very special point in time, that kind of early 90s, late 80s moment where it did feel that those sort of things were possible. So one of my best friends from that time, who I'm still in touch with, he's an academic at Cambridge now and international relations expert. He's asked to speak all over the world, but he came from a Swansea Comprehensive school. So you do find people like that, but you do realise it kind of lifts the curtain on these people who are being lauded and have these incredible lives of privilege. You realise they're not that much different to you, and this can sound really arrogant, but you also realise they're not that much cleverer than you actually. And it's just you begin to realise then, you know what, it's not them, it's the opportunities that they've had that puts them in that position.
For sure. And as you say, they're having those programs that allow you to see it, or having the role models that allow you to understand it's possible. Those things of empowerment are so crucial in all areas, and we're definitely going to talk about that today, about the sustainability profession and how we can encourage that more. But you studied law, is that right? But then
yes,
that wasn't the career path that you went down. So could you just talk briefly about your early career out of university?
Yeah, yes, of course. So I did law because I come from an white Asian heritage background, and there are 5 things you're allowed to study at university. They're law, medicine, accountancy, engineering, pharmacy. Really, you're a massive disappointment if you do anything outside those 5, or certainly was when it was. And this is one of the reasons, of course, why I'm so passionate about IEMA, because we provide professional structure for people involved in sustainability, which gives you professional recognition, is incredibly important, particularly for non-British heritage communities, I think. Sure. But law, so I did law. I hated law. Came out, didn't want to be a lawyer, but wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And so, and again, I think this really highlighted the inequalities at the time. I couldn't get a job because I was a Asian woman off a council estate, and I didn't have any friends or friends of friends or parents' friends who would give me one. So I was watching people I knew at university suddenly going to these incredible jobs, and I was waitressing and being a healthcare assistant. In fact, looking back, that was the best thing that could have happened to me, because it absolutely grounded me in how people work, how teams work, which has been incredibly useful in leadership roles. You understand what actually doing real jobs are all about, and the stresses and strains, and I think that has made me an infinitely better leader. So eventually I got I did a couple of years in doing kind of office jobs, bit of PR stuff, then back into, short-term contracts. Then they would finish, so I was back to healthcare assistant and waitressing and stacking shelves and all those sort of things, and eventually got a bursary to do a course at Polytechnic of Central London, Westminster University, in journalism. And that was one of those moments, there's moments you think, if I hadn't opened the paper, and it shows how old I am, because I opened a paper and saw the advert in the paper. If I hadn't opened that paper on that day, that might never have happened, but it did, and that led me into the BBC.
Sure. And this is the piece that is so interesting from my perspective as a recruiter, is it's very much those moments in people's career where they could go down any one path, and we play such a pivotal part in those conversations, because if they take this role, their career goes this way. It's the butterfly effect, isn't it? You take that role, you can go that way, or you don't even see the role, all of these opportunities that no longer exist to you. So I think those are really interesting moments, and how we think about encouraging people to be open-minded, because it sounds like you perhaps, at that point you weren't quite sure where your career would go, and certainly I'm sure if we had said that you would be the chief executive of the globally leading environmental and sustainability association back then, that probably wouldn't have been something that you could even think about. So no. but it happened because of that. So sorry,
yeah, I'm just going to say to build on that point, which I think is a really important one, because, and I think this comes very much back to the conversation we're having. We can't imagine the jobs that will be available in 20 years' time. I mean, who even knew that web developer was a thing 15 or 20 years ago? IEMA didn't exist when I took that training as a journalist, and now look where we are. So I think the ability, and as you said, as a recruiter, you have an absolutely pivotal role in being able to open those pathways, open the book for people, because often you're a victim of your own education, training, cultural background, heritage, peer group. All of these things frame sometimes quite a closed or small landscape in terms of what you are able to achieve or what you think you can do. And the role of the recruiter in cracking that open and saying, well, have you thought about this or that, I think is absolutely fundamental. And you and the sector are going to play an absolutely pivotal role in making sustainability reflect our modern communities.
For sure. And I suppose now it's far more common to talk to people, friends, family, the younger generation who are thinking about green jobs, or would talk about a green job, or I want to do something that's good for the environment. But I suppose probably when you took that role with the BBC, that wasn't something that was even on the big, on a big scale, the agenda. What was the pivotal moment in your career that gained you the interest in environment and sustainability? Was that during the BBC?
It was. It was about 4 years. So I started in local radio and then did the progression into local television, and then back into network radio. So I worked for a long time for a bit, it doesn't exist anymore, but a bit of the BBC that provided news packages for local radio, all the local radio stations in the country. And it was actually an agriculture story. The BSE public inquiry, there was an inquiry into the BSE crisis. So this happened in the Blair government years. And it just struck me that every local radio station either had a victim of variant CJD, which was the disease that had been linked to BSE in cattle, in the human disease, or had a farmer who had been very badly affected by having herds culled out. And so I said to and I'm very grateful to my then boss, I said, I think we should go and cover this. And I was there for 3 weeks, day and night. There was so much interest from local radio stations because they're very close to their communities. They understand what matters to people, and they themselves have got so much interest from listeners as a result of running these stories. And as you're there, you're picking up other stuff and you're talking to the farmers, leaders, and that sort of thing. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting story. And at the time, nobody really was covering nationally agriculture and agricultural related stories. Inevitably, then you start doing more on the environment because of there's a real, sometimes a tension, sometimes an opportunity. And so then I began to move into environment. But you're right, again, it was at that time where it was quite difficult to get environment stories onto the television. And I think it still is, to be honest, to the television and radio. You have to work hard, even now, even with the crisis that we're in, to get profile for the environment. And I think that's been reflected in the general election campaign. We haven't heard much about the nature or climate crisis in the last 6 weeks.
For sure. And I think, we saw this huge boom. I'm sure IEMA saw it. We saw it as talent advisors in 21 and 22 coming out of the pandemic, how much traction there was for sustainability and environment. But perhaps the back end of 22 or certainly into 23 and 24, the negative views around it started to come out in the media. I think the heavily publicised FT article of the ESG is beyond redemption and may it rest in peace was one of those ones that really caught the attention of the industry. Having worked in the media, what's your perspective on the role it plays in the sustainable transformation journey and also how it could be improved?
I think part of the problem, and this was a fundamental problem in trying to report on climate change. So 20 years ago or so, I did an interview with someone from the Grantham Institute, the internationally renowned UK-based climate research body. And the researcher I was talking to, senior researcher, said, do you know what, in the 2020s, we will regularly see 40-degree temperatures in the summer in Europe, and occasionally we'll start seeing those in the UK. So this is not a surprise. And at the time, it was I got one story out of it. That it ran on the television. It ran on 6 o'clock news on television and radio. But journalism it's like a shark. The media, it can't stop. You can't stop, and you have to carry on. And the next bit has to be worse than the previous bit, or the story has to move on. This is why I think true crime is such a genre, because there's a plot, there's a narrative, and we'll talk about storytelling in a business context a little bit later. But and so if you write stories about the world is in crisis, the world is in crisis, the world is in crisis, there has to be a revolution or an evolution to that story. And so the easiest one to do is to go, do you know what, the world isn't in crisis, or this is a load of old nonsense. Or so unfortunately every story that the media tell has a narrative arc, and sometimes that is the opposite. So what can journalists do about that? Well, to a certain extent, and I feel this when we attend the COPs, is that the private sector gets it, because even at the very basic, the entry level is, if you use less stuff, you will save money on your bottom line, or money that you can give back to your customers. That makes a huge amount of sense to anybody in business. I'm not saying it isn't a challenge. I think it is to really embed sustainability, but there is a message there that people can hang on to. So I suppose you have to ask yourself, in a way, does it matter? Because the next evolution of that story will be someone will pick it up again and say, what a good thing this is. Meanwhile, the people who are actually doing the job are carrying on doing the job because businesses need certainty, and they are planning for 5, 10, 15 years hence.
Yes, understood. So your career then changed from the kind of broadcasting journalism into this advocacy, policy, leadership roles in, I suppose, in-house roles. Was it? I think I made a note here: Water UK, CropLife, and now IEMA. What was it that prompted the shift from broadcasting into an in-house positions, and how did you find that change?
It was a number of things. Some of them personal, but professionally I had felt I'd come slightly to the end of the road in terms of what you have this mental checklist of all the things that you want to do in a particular role, and so co-presenting Newsnight, which I did, doing part of a co-pres on the Today programme, just a little one, but yes, I've done that. I've done from our own correspondent. That was always one of my ones that I really wanted to do, and bit by bit, these things just got checked off to the stage I got, well, I could kind of run around the same track again, but it's not necessarily going to be any better. And there's no other job I'm looking at in the BBC thinking, I really want to do that. And there's always a danger you become the angry old git in the corner who's kind of shaking their fist at the sky and saying, oh, it's not like when I was a lad, it's not the same and it's all awful. And I didn't want to be that angry old git in the corner. So I thought, well, it's probably time to think about moving. I'll be absolutely honest, at the time the BBC was giving voluntary redundancy, which was quite an attractive option. It just gave me a bit of thinking space and breathing space. And so I started applying for roles. It wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. And I think partly at the time, well, I say partly, I know there was, because it was very obvious. There was quite a lot of unconscious, shall we say, charitably unconscious bias of talking to some headhunters and employers. But I had the role at Water UK and then at CropLife. What I wanted to do was try and find areas where there was a lot of quite heated debate on either side and not a lot of fertile ground in the middle, and see if you could bring people together. I was more successful in some roles than others, but when I was approached for IEMA, it just felt, I have to say, it felt like I was coming home. Our members are incredible. The work we do, the staff team is amazing. It's an honour and a privilege, really. I mean, I know leaders say that, but it really is an honour and a privilege to lead that incredible team and to support our members.
How much did you know about the organisation before joining?
Not a lot. But my first thought was, wow, I'm so glad this exists, and the potential to expand our membership base and to get sustainability knitted into business processes is huge. And I think we are incredibly lucky. We have members of our team who have been in really senior roles in other sectors, who bring a huge amount of experience and knowledge, and they've joined because they want to give something back. They want to see the world a better place, and they see the potential that IEMA has to be a driving force globally for that. And so we're thinking from a recruitment point of view. Funnily enough, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone that as a very strongly values-driven organisation, we're very lucky that we can attract people that, to be perfectly honest, could probably double their salary in a more corporate, more competitive corporate environment. But there is a really shared sense that this has to happen, and we can be part of the agents of change for this to happen.
For sure, and I think that's a really nice segue into talking about IEMA, because for me the reason why the IEMA as an organisation is successful, and other organisations who take that lead of being sustainably led, means that it is an attraction tool for talent. We when we first set up the business at GS2, where our mindset was we would recruit sustainability and environmental professionals into businesses, but actually what's transpired is much broader than that, and it's working with what we call sustainably conscious organisations and helping them find their leadership talent. So it's not necessarily a technical expert, but we're finding business leaders, but those who really care about creating an organisation where sustainability is a core value, and it's actually the thing that's going to drive the business forward. And I see very much that with IEMA and your role. Having been in obviously leadership roles in, I suppose, smaller and slightly different organisations, could you tell me about some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a CEO of a prestigious organisation, and I suppose those competing demands that you constantly have to juggle?
Yes, and if I may, Josh, I'll just pick up on that really germane comment you made about sustainability-driven organisations. I mean, certainly we find, talking to our students and early career professional members, that they won't stay somewhere that they don't think reflects their values. So, just having a couple of pages of people with fleeces on in page 104 of the annual report to show how sustainable you are doesn't really wash. You have to be walking the walk, and you are missing out on an awful lot of really talented people. And it's not just sustainability professionals. We've found this talking to young people. I say young people, people under 30, people under 35. They want to feel good about getting up in the morning and going into work and feeling that they're doing good, whatever part of the economy they're in. So it really is and we hear this from a lot of the businesses that we work with, that the part of the reason they're doing this is a little bit selfish, because they know that they're not going to attract the talent they need unless they are walking the walk. Sure. But back to IEMA. So interestingly, the challenges that you have in a leadership role, and I think other leaders would probably say the same, is not the ones that you think you're going to have when you have your first CEO role. You think it's all going to be, staring into the middle distance and your hand gently on the tiller as you sail towards the horizon of success. And actually, it's often about, gosh, what point do we take on a new person in terms of the bottom line? How do we justify that in terms of talking to members? At what point is this particular team really struggling? How do we support them through that? How do we help develop our staff team to make sure that we retain them? What do we do to make things fun? Do we have an office? Do we not have an office? We're now office free, but we make sure that there's lots of co-working spaces for people to meet when they need to. How often is too much for people to come together? That takes a lot of my time. I have a one-to-one with every member of the staff team at some point in the year. In fact, I've just come off one, which is their time, their safe space, and that's where I get most of my learning of how the organisation is working. It's an incredibly important time for me, but a lot of it is just kind of the infrastructure, the day-to-day infrastructure of running an organisation. Should we have a face-to-face staff meeting or not, because we've got a big project on, and are people feeling nervous they're being taken away from their desks, and what does that mean in terms of well-being? All those sort of things. And then there's also the hand on the tiller and looking out to the middle distance. But the running of the business, I think, is that making sure that you're present enough, but not so much present that people feel they're being micromanaged as well. Getting that balance right is never easy, I don't think.
No, for sure. I understand that, and I think as we see individuals go from these some of these more technical roles into leadership roles, and particularly for the environment and sustainability profession, which I think, if we look at it from a timeline perspective, back when I first placed my first ever environmental, so it was an environmental management systems manager, 14,001 focused for Southern, it was Southern Railway back then. And I remember that role, and I suppose how far down the pecking order it was within the organisation, to post-pandemic and the rise of these individuals who perhaps have been in these underpaid, undervalued roles to now be in positions of not just more prominence but actual leadership positions, but being maybe more of a technical expert, learning that difference between being a technical expert in a box to being a leader of people is a very, very difficult journey that people go through. And I think that there's something, and I'm sure IEMA are doing work around this, as to how do you help people on that journey because of the prominence of these roles now. So I'd be keen to talk a bit more about what you do at IEMA and maybe some of those projects that you've been creating that have developed impact for your members, how you help them develop themselves. Could you talk a bit about some of the sort of constituent parts of what you provide to your members and to the industry?
Yes, absolutely. I'm delighted to, because this was one of the things that struck me when I joined the organisation. We always say to our new members of the team, and we've got a fantastic new member who's recently joined, your first 3 months is incredibly important for us as an organisation, because we're all part of the system. You get the opportunity to say, can you just explain why this works, or why are you doing it that way, which is incredibly valuable. And so those first 3 months as a leader, as a CEO, as a member of the C-suite is really important as well. Because I thought, well, I spoke to lots and lots of members. We're very science-based heavy, as you can imagine, as a professional institute. Lots of people with science-based degrees. And I had lots of conversations around, we find it really difficult to kind of get the C-suite on board. Why is that? Why are they not listening? And the more conversations I had, the more it became apparent that, absolutely to your point, science-based graduates are trained in a discipline that seeks experimentation, and then you work through that and you come out with a conclusion. And that thing that sits in the bottom right hand of the spreadsheet, that's the answer. So that's the answer. And eventually you come up against humanities graduates who have been trained in a discipline of argument. So, nothing's certain. Here's some facts, here's some other facts. Let's have an argument and then work out what the conclusion is. And that those two disciplines just don't sit easily together. So we have a number of tools. So starting with our how-to series, which we started originally pitched to students and early career professionals. And this is it's half an hour webinar. They're all on our library as well. And if you join live, you get to ask some 15 minutes of questions as well. And so we've done things like how to present at C-suite, how to tell a story. That's one of our most popular ones, is storytelling, because actually that figure on the spreadsheet needs to have a narrative around it. It needs context. You need to draw your humanities graduate C-suite through to a conclusion. And here's the good and here's the bad and here are the arguments, even though that seems absolutely obvious to you, which it is if you're a science graduate. So there's that. We also do a variety throughout. We have a fantastic full and fellows relationship managers, so we have networking, and because I think peer-to-peer learning is a really important part of this process. What have you found that has worked to make that case? And then we do a lot, particularly the senior leadership team does a lot of work with C-suites when we're asked to by companies that we're working in partnership with, or with our individual members. We have learning leading with sustainability. We have materials that we've put together to make the case to NEDs. I mean, I sit as an NED myself. I know you don't have the time really to go into a lot of detail, but you want something that just explains the case to you and why this is important for your particular business. So we're working at lots of different levels, but fundamentally it's just that same question of how do you put together a convincing narrative, strong narrative for your case.
Sure. So just on that last point, so is that almost like consultancy work that you provide to members and go into their organisations to help them land the message? Is that what you mean?
It's a good question. IEMA used to have a consultancy arm. We don't call it consultancy. It's more. It's not project based. It's more. It tends to be, we'll come and work with a particular at a particular board meeting with a particular, with a set of tools that we have, or we'll share particular documentation. So it's more, I guess, in the coaching space. But some of that work is longer term than others. I mean, it really depends on what members and our corporate partners say they want. But it is funny enough. The reason I'm hesitating slightly is it is a discussion that we've had with our board and at a senior team level as well, is whether whether the next step might be looking at a consultancy model, but I think that is a long way off.
Sure.
Before we actually even have that conversation, to be honest.
But I think it would, and I'm not trying to tell you about your business model, but from a recruitment perspective, the growth of the advisory businesses in environment and sustainability has been phenomenal, and given the member base you have, clearly there'll be individuals there that are going to the likes of your big four or the smaller consulting firms to get their support on projects and programs that they're running. And if you're all providing the tools for those people to grow, it might make sense for you to provide some more hands-on support and advisory work to them. So interesting to see how that goes. We'll stay tuned for that.
Yes,
sure.
I should say that would be, we tend to err on the side of caution as a senior team, and we would want to, I think the main thing we'd want to do is to consult members and see what they thought, because we're their organisation. But it is, as you can imagine, inevitably it's one of those conversations that we've had. Maybe we should think in the medium term, next 2 or 3 years, about asking members what they think.
For sure, understood. And given the topical nature of today being the election, I can't help but get away from talking about the work you do with governments and other organisations to actually influence and pressurise around environmental and sustainability policy. Could you talk a bit about that work that you do and how you go about that?
Yes, and you're right. I think it's important to have these conversations, because there's a lot of quite understandable suspicion about what sounds like lobbying. What exactly? Who are you lobbying for, and what is this? So we've tried to make the process as transparent as possible, both to our members and externally. So our policy work is very much led by members. We have a policy and practice committee, which is member based. One of our board members chairs that, and that sets the agenda, if you like, for our policy work throughout the year. Obviously you do need a little bit of bandwidth, because things happen that you might not expect, so you do need a bit of capacity for that. But we have policy leads in our policy team who are experts in their field, and they will help. So we do not just policy, but the practice bit as well. So practitioner guidelines, reports, those sort of best practice documentation as well. So so members can keep up with their professional journey. We are a small organisation. We're not the CBI or NFU. We don't have automatic convening rights, if you like, with ministers or with a new government or new administration. So what we do is, we work quite specifically around green skills training and jobs, and we have worked closely with other organisations. I know there's one piece of documentation that has been asked, so opposition leaders have asked to see. I say opposition at the moment, people who are not in the current administration. I don't even know if that is a thing at the moment, where constitutionally we are, but which is great. Now, if they ask for it, that's always a really good sign. And we will be, you can imagine, a change of administration, even if it's the same party, everybody wants to get in there and talk to ministers who have a limited amount of bandwidth, because they are learning their department and being briefed, all those sort of things as well. So working in collaboration with other organisations, so you have that big collective convening power. That's really helpful, but also making sure that ministers are aware that you are the experts in this particular field. And of course we have ongoing working relationships with senior civil servants across government departments. We have senior civil servants who are members and fellows in the organisation, so they understand what we do and when it would be relevant to talk to us. And the other tool that's quite useful to use is to say, well, look, what questions do you want answered? Here are all our thousands of experts who are waiting to support you with that. Let us know. We'll set up something, a round table or something with our members, and they'll be able to give you the actual practitioner view of what this particular policy might do. And that has been taken up quite frequently by members of the former administration and senior leaders in the other political parties, because it's a very quick and very useful way of finding out what really will work and what won't work from a policy perspective.
For sure. But the way that you talk about that engagement, I suppose, is very much the pragmatic and business-focused approach that we see sustainability professionals and leaders have to take if their organisation shifts and changes. An incoming new CEO, it's on a different scale, I suppose, but it's the same thing. Everybody's vying for their time. They're trying to find their feet. How do I make this message to them about the important things on sustainability that we're already doing, and perhaps to get them to commit to something more, and finding the right time to do that? So I suppose that positioning piece is really important. Is that something that you help your members with, and are aware of the pivotal role that you could play in helping them to, I suppose, achieve more and be more seen and visible in their organisation?
That's a really good way of comparing it, because you're right, it is very, very similar. New senior leadership member, new CEO, and I think the principles are the same. So you will know where you're really in a kind of focused way, where you're adding value and where you can be, support as the policy expert in a particular way and in a particular aspect. But I'd also say that collaboration is just as important. So are there members of the finance team or the corporate affairs team or the procurement team, who are your allies in this conversation, and can you be part of that wider conversation with them when their time comes to have that conversation with the incoming chief? And also, one thing that I know all our members really value, and it often comes out when we have surveys, is that peer-to-peer learning, because it is a very fast-moving sector. Everybody's testing and trying stuff out, and the ability to jump on a webinar or a call and hear from someone in a completely different part of the economy who's tried something which works, I think that's very powerful. I mean, if you can put together a paper to show, we'd like to try this because X company has tried this in Y sector and it's worked really well, here are their learnings. Again, it's back to that narrative. People feel much more comfortable if they think something has been successful before, and that's how we learn. That's how we learn as humans, and that's how we learn through that kind of narrative arc. And so I think that's a very powerful way of supporting a message as well. But thinking about how am I going to engage this person who's got like 5 minutes before they move on to the next thing? How do I do that in a way that's in my paper that's really going to speak to them and speak to their priorities? And what are their priorities? How can I join that to what I'm trying to say? That was how we always used to work in the BBC. If you say 10,000 people are ... most people, even if you go to football regularly, you can't really see what 10,000 people looks like. But if you start with an individual example, this has happened to this person, and there are 909,000 other people who are in a similar situation, then it's much more human and direct, and real, you've drawn people into the story.
Yeah, I understand. So thinking about that, I suppose then, and the way things are communicated as a skill or a trait, what do you believe, or I don't know whether IEMA has published, like the key traits to be successful, a successful leader, or even just a successful practitioner in environment and sustainability in today's world?
I think I think that ability to put this in a narrative context. We all like to think, and I do think working from home has broken down these barriers. But it always used to be that we pretended that we weren't brothers, sisters, wives, husbands, partners, in work. All of that. Kids, sorry, that's the school, sorry, I've just got to take that call. We'd pretend like we had no connection to the outside world while we sat in an office, and then we just picked it up on the way out. That just doesn't work anymore. And actually being able to use people's, everybody's got, reads the papers, everybody sees the climate changing, everybody has young relatives or friends who are deeply concerned, understandably, about the changing climate. And so being able to use that as part of your business pitch, I think, is really helpful. And being human as well. I mean, I think the most difficult thing about I think about leading or trying to lead, and I talk about a leader, but we're all works in progress, is being consistent. It's that consistency of approach, because when people see you, they want to have a reasonable expectation that the conversation they had a month ago is not going to go wildly differently to the conversation today. And being consistent and present, I think, gives people certainty and trust in you as an individual. But it's not easy to pull off, because we've all got stuff going on in the background. But finding a way of being consistent, I think, is the most important thing, I think, for someone who wants to lead a team.
Sure. And if we think about individuals who we get approached by regularly, I'm sure you have members like this who want to be pursue let's call it a green career, or who wants to reposition their career path to focus on environment and sustainability in some way. What advice would you give to individuals who perhaps don't have that technical skill set, but who do want to transition, and how can IEMA help them on that journey?
Well, I think specialist recruiters like yourselves are really important in this role, because you see all the different options that are available, and you're fundamentally important in supporting people. We have something called the Green Careers Hub, which we set up very much because of this, because if you think that in 2030, when we're starting to have to meet some of these targets, 80% of the workforce then are already in employment, and many of those people will need to be supported to upskill, to change skills. The hub is there for you to just start thinking about what different green careers might look like. We've got some great case studies, also salary ranges, what sort of qualifications you might need, all the basic information. Obviously, I would say this, a little bit of a plug for IEMA. We have 350 courses that will help you on your sustainability journey. And I think also have conversation with your current organisation. There will probably be a lot of scope for you to explore what a more sustainable you looks like in your current role, or a sustainable wider role or different role. Now, that might be working in wellbeing teams or green teams or sustainability teams, but again, often it's really easy to demonstrate value from some very basic things. We've all seen, even now, city centres absolutely alight. All the offices are alight in the middle of the night. So how do you switch those off at night? And that is going to definitely save you money. Something as basic as that. Or yes. Do we really need to print on one side? Could we do that on both sides? Do we need to print at all? Those sort of things. Not only are you saving the planet, but you're saving the company on the bottom line as well. It's a really good start, introduction into a sustainable career.
For sure. I'm glad you say that, because that's my number one tip to people when they say that they want to transition is, well, let's just look at what you're currently doing and how can you make that as impactful as possible, because
exactly
these roles there are only so many sustainability roles that are needed in an organization. Actually, what we need are people who run other functions or do other roles who have a sustainable mindset and who help that journey. And I think that there's a slight misunderstanding there, that I have to be in a sustainability role or it's not part of my remit. Well, it's like, no, that's the opposite of what we need. We need everybody to just do more in their current role. So good we're aligned in that message that we're making to the market.
Completely. It's very like digital. Again, 30, 40 years ago, that would have been a really specialist occupation, and you would have had the IT person, or not, they weren't even called IT in those days, but it was somebody sitting in Silicon Valley coding stuff. Now, you couldn't really exist in a modern workplace without having some IT or digital knowledge, even if it's just, how to use icons and work on a computer. So I think we have a mission. We always say all jobs greener. We'd like to see a point at which sustainability was as an assumed skill as digital and IT is now.
For sure. You mentioned earlier that the roles that exist now were not the roles that were thought of back when you were moving into the BBC. I suppose it's going to be the same as the landscape of green jobs evolved for the future. So my final question on this before we move to some quickfire and then wrap up is, how do you see the landscape of green jobs evolving, and are there particular roles or skills that you foresee in the future that come about that are quite cool, interesting, that you're thinking about as a membership body that might be on the horizon?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think partly this will be shaped by whatever administration in the UK is in the future. Now, I think we need make a big differentiation between UK members and our members around the world, because the challenges, for example, for members in West Africa are very different. It's around governance, it's around money, the loss and damage fund that has been promised for ages and is still not happening through the climate change talk process. It's very fundamental challenges which they are grappling with. But certainly in the UK, I suspect, most parties have given a nod to the circular economy. And I think that's one area where it's slightly been put in the too difficult box by some organisations, but actually the ability to really reduce, reuse, recycle, why are we doing it in the first place? Can we provide support for renovating materials that we've already used? I suspect that's going to be, because it's an economic driver as well. We just eventually, all this stuff we're digging out of the ground or using virgin resources, the cost is already tracking up, and that will just continue. So just from a very basic point of view, I can see more roles in the circular economy. I also think we've got carbon capture and storage. All parties have talked about that. Query hydrogen economy. I don't think it's going to be obviously a good fit for everybody, but for some sectors it will be. So there are a lot of emerging science-based jobs, but also I think the culture, what we just haven't got, and we're seeing this politically in Europe and to a certain extent in this country, is a narrative now. We've got narrative that net zero will make you poorer and colder. And I think that's been a bit of a failure by us as a sector, not to communicate effectively what the benefits of this transition will be. And so we will need a lot of people in communication, cultural change, change management, all those really tricky things that we just haven't really addressed, so people understand that this is, there are huge benefits to this transition as well as being, we can't ignore the challenges, but there are benefits to balance those.
For sure, yeah. And I think this, and we certainly don't have time to go down the route of greenwashing, but the issue I have with the greenwashing tag is that actually what it does to some degree, it actually stops the communication, and you have the green hushing, which is totally not beneficial, because actually what we need to be doing is crafting that message, as you say, making sure it's understood and relatable so that we buy people into what we're trying to do. And I think it's been very easy for the profession to be so technical to keep people out, which has meant that actually now we're trying to bring people with us the barriers are already up, and that storytelling piece is crucial. And it's very easy if somebody says something to say, okay, well, that's greenwashing, and then that stifles the innovation. But actually, we should be encouraging people to set big targets and to go for things, and then know that the net result will still be a positive, rather than everybody sitting on their hands not doing anything for fear of being cancelled, and then we don't have the innovation that's needed. So that's a bit of a rant and another topic of conversation, but I think it's an important thing about messaging and communications and how important it is.
Totally. I was on a platform with somebody from the UN, quite a senior person from the UN, and they said any progress is good progress. Any forward movement is good movement. And it's absolutely true. You know, it's back to this narrative: good, bad. You know, so the media's just looking, and it's such an easy story to write. Oh yeah, they say they're really green, and yet they took a business class flight to blah blah blah, or they're not using this. And actually, if you're moving in a forward direction, who is perfect in this world? Nobody is perfect. We all we're messy individuals. We make mistakes. Sometimes we say or do stupid things that we regret. But that's part of being absolutely fundamental part of being human. So surely if the movement is in the right direction, chastising someone for using a non-reusable cup is not really the point, I would have thought. Yet surely the point is to say, okay, how can we make this better? How can we learn from that mistake and move on and make this a better overall outcome?
Absolutely. So look, I'm going to go into some quick fire questions, and then we'll finish up. So which sustainability solution for you do you feel is underrated but holds significant potential?
Underrated, I would say actually maybe waste management, in terms of the potential we have to really reduce our impact, and that goes back into that circular economy piece, is that I think waste is not seen as a sexy subject necessarily, and yet the work that you can do, the good you can do through good resource permitting, regulation and management is immense. I mean, transformational potentially.
For sure. Who inspires you the most in the sustainability sector?
Oh, there's so many people. I mean, it would be really difficult to pick one individual, but I think activists in the global south, the people who are really on the front line, who are and often risking their lives to protect nature, but also to speak truth to power. I think anybody working in that space, I have huge respect for.
What's your favourite book on sustainability?
Do you know, I would say it's not actually it's not a book on sustainability, but it is, and it's one I've read fairly recently, Ultra Processed People by Chris Van Terleken, which is a book about ultra processed food and the way that our food system is killing us, and by implication killing the planet. It really is one of the few that really made me stop and think about how we are feeding people in a way that is so unhealthy, and how we could be so much more sustainable by changing that system. And so I think food and farming is such an important part of the overall sustainability conversation that, again, we don't often have as sustainability professionals.
To date, what achievement at IEMA are you most proud of?
Oh gosh, well, most of the things that are amazing things that have happened because of our incredible team. So it would be outrageous of me to take credit for all of them, or indeed many of them. I think the Diverse Sustainability Initiative, which was something it was very close to my heart to try and support other organisations to have a better and more diverse organisation. We're so bad at diversity and sustainability, so anything that changes that dial, I think I'm very proud of.
Sure. And what's your top priority for IEMA over the next 12 months?
Oh, excuse me. Top priority. So we have a big IT transformation, which we're undergoing at the moment, and hopefully members will see a better service, a better system. That's so important because that's the way we communicate with most of our members. But I've described it to the team, all IT projects are a bit like surgery. You've got to have it, but it's quite painful and the recovery is quite a long time. So I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver to members, but I'm hoping that when we finally go live with the new project, with the new system, you'll see some really positive changes.
Great. Do you have a time frame in mind for that?
I'm not going to put it out. This year.
Okay.
Excuse me.
That's okay.
This year, shall we say this year? Yes, absolutely. But yes, I don't want to put the team under more pressure than they are already, because there are so many tickets and so many, people reading documents and web pages. But yes, we are quietly confident that it will be good.
Well, best of luck with that. So, as we wrap up, I suppose the final question for me is for you about your own legacy, I suppose, and by the end of your career, how you would like to know that you've left the world better than you found it.
I think my measure of personal success is that we have a sustainability sector. And for me, that is all about making sure we are relevant to communities that we just don't communicate with at the moment. Communities of colour and white working class communities as well. And that is about the messaging, but also making sure that everyone, wherever they are, has an opportunity to be part of the sustainability sector. Brilliant.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's been a fascinating episode. It's been really interesting to hear about your background, perspective, what you're doing at IEMA, and the great work that is involving. So I'm sure there'll be people that are listening that might want to reach out to you or connect with you or your team at IEMA. Would you be happy for those to do so? And I think we said maybe LinkedIn would be the best place.
Absolutely delighted. Yes, please do. LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. Find me there. You can find IEMA on LinkedIn as well. We've got a contact area on our webpage, iema.net. Have a look. If there's anything that's of interest, please do get in touch. We've got a fantastic membership team. They are brilliant, I have to say, and we'll be delighted to have a chat to you. And Josh, thank you so much again. It's been such an interesting conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. And when you ask, you've asked a lot of questions where I've had to think, that is a good question. What is my answer to that? So, so it's been a great conversation.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. And your journalist and broadcasting skills were put to the test, but you passed with flying colours, which was great. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. We'll of course be staying in touch because of the diverse sustainability initiative that we're part of. I know we have the CEO dinner next week and a few other things, but. Pleasure to always support IEMA, and I look forward to catching up with you soon. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I'd welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.